Hey guys, we are here to go through the practice FRQ with you. That was about Wolsey. We are using this FRQ to kind of wrap up poetry because Shakespeare writes in poetic form. And we're also using it as a practice for the Q2 test because it's a play and you might see a play in there as well. So we're going to start off with the prompt and looking at what was expected of us for this essay. And then Ms. Shiva and I are going to kind of riff on the analysis for the passage, just to kind of get, so you can, we'll do like a talking to the text, so you can hear kind of what our thoughts were going through. And of course, you've already written the essay, so you'll be able to go like, oh yeah, I did that, or oh, that would have made sense, as we kind of go through it. And then we've put a bunch of other slides together for your reference and you can go through them. We've got a few little kudos and recs for you as well. So we're going to try to keep this around 20 minutes. Ha ha ha. Okay. So starting off with the prompt. And we both have the ability to write on here. So you may see us clumsily trying to write in here. The following speech from Shakespeare's play Henry VIII. Okay, so we're getting a reference that this is a play. It's nice that we know it's Shakespeare. Cardinal Wolsey considers his sudden downfall from his position as advisor to the king. Spokesmen for the king have just left Wolsey alone on stage. So some of the very astute people who were writing got that this was probably a soliloquy or a monologue, right? Because he's alone on stage revealing his true feelings. And your job is to read the speech carefully, then write a well-organized essay in which you analyze how Shakespeare uses elements such as allusion, figurative language, and tone to convey Wolsey's complex response to his dismissal from court. So a couple of things here. I want to point out it says elements such. That means that they're saying that you can use these, but they're not saying you have to. But you're pretty much guaranteed that those are going to be in there. So if you choose to write on those, you know right away you should be looking for figurative language, allusion, and tone as you're going through this. Some of you even picked up on shifts in tone, which was a really nice component to a lot of essays. And then the other piece is this. It should be a complex response. So it's going to require more than one emotion. If you said this ended in him feeling, you know, sad or melancholy, that's not necessarily complex. So we need to see shifts and moves and some complexity in here. The other thing to note is if you misread the prompt and you didn't understand that Wolsey was the one talking and he was alone on stage, there were quite a few people that thought this was being said about him instead of him saying it. So that could cause some problems. So taking an extra minute and reading the prompt so you understand, you know, who your speaker is, or doing soaps. And quite a few people in your notes I saw soaps written out on the side, which was awesome because you got speaker right away, you got subject right away, and a lot of you pulled purpose from there as well, which was awesome. So you can use your, you know, since it is poetic form, you can use your poetry drill to help you. So good job, anybody who did that. I even saw some people analyze using meter, which was really awesome. Okay, anything to add to the prompt, Ms. Sheaf?
All right, so no, nothing to add to the prompt. Those are all good things for sure. The complexity, like she said. And then I would say just maybe, sorry, one more thing I would add would be make sure you're identifying things correctly. So figurative language, right? You're looking for, in this passage, you were looking for metaphors. Be careful you're not labeling something else as figurative language. And then, yeah, that would be my advice for the prompt.
Nice. Okay, so when we go and we take a look at Wolsey's speech alone on stage after just losing a beloved position, here's what we get. So farewell to the little good you bear me. Farewell, by the way, a question mark, a long farewell to all my greatness. So right away in the first two lines, we see a repetition of the word farewell. And some of you picked up on that right away. Obviously, we have a repetition of threes in here in the sense that there's 3 days, 3 farewells. So that would have been a really interesting thing to kind of pay attention to. If it means something or not, you kind of have to wait and see as you go through the process of analyzing. But each farewell reads slightly different. So farewell, and then that line shows separation, right? It's not a hyphen, which would join that with the rest of the passage. Instead, it's kind of offset from the rest of the passage. And maybe at the beginning, that's how he's feeling, right? To the little good you bear me, right? And he is saying his final goodbye. Of course, he doesn't. It's like one of those death scenes where they just keep dying and dying and dying, right? So he says farewell, but that's where his speech starts. And then the next time he says farewell is a question mark. And so already we see some doubt happening. So farewell, so final, farewell, question mark, a long farewell to all my greatness. And so that's where he finally lays the blame, is that it's not him saying goodbye. He doesn't want to say goodbye. It's his greatness that is saying goodbye. And his greatness comes from the position that he's in. This is the state of man. Today he puts forth the tender leaves of hope. Tomorrow blossoms and bears his blushing honors thick upon him. And third day comes a frost, a killing frost. And when he thinks, good, easy man, full surely, his greatness is a ripening, nips his root, and he falls as I do. So I'm going to stop there because that's our first really big piece of figurative language. And we've got some really good imagery happening in there with the rise and fall of a man being compared to a flower, right? That there is this hope, these tender leaves of hope that blossom into something that is beautiful, something that he has worked hard for, right? And then a frost, a killing frost comes along. And this killing frost is maybe his termination, or it may be something that he has done to cause this problem for himself. Because later we see that it says, when he thinks, good, easy man, right? Things are going well for him. Full surely his greatness is a ripening, right? He's certain things are going well. Then someone comes along and nips his root, which is death, right? If you nip the roots of a flower, you are killing it. So this frost that happens may be this representation of a death, but it also may be the thing that caused that nipping to happen. And then, Mishif, do you want to do the next set of figurative language?
Sure. Okay, so I bracketed that off, so that was a good one to talk about. And then his next thing is, I have ventured like little wanton boys that swim on bladders, this many summers in a sea of glory, but far beyond my depth. So, and this one had the little asterisk about swimming on bladders. Good thing it had a footnote, right? Not literal bladders in your body, but they were using like floaties out into the depths of the water, right? So you were already set up to think about a man as a flower who's, the frost came, nipped it, and then he fell. So that's kind of one aspect of his termination. And then, so you're thinking about that, and then he tells you that just like those, and he uses little boys, again, it's Shakespeare time, but also like the stereotypical like brashness and invincibility maybe of a little boy. Not that that only applies to boys, but okay, it's the time. So the ones that swim out in the summer, right, with that like reckless abandon, sort of like I can do anything, in a sea of glory, right? But then it ends by saying, but far beyond my depth. So here, a lot of you in your essay, I could tell were sensing like, oh, okay, maybe through this use of figurative language, him comparing himself to like little boys that swim out to sea on their flotation devices in the summer, that metaphor could be highlighting his potential pride as an aspect in his termination. And then he even ends it by saying, my high-blown pride at length broke under me, just like a flotation device could break under you when you're out too far into the water, and now has left me weary and old with service, to the mercy of a rude stream that must forever hide me. So this one kind of goes all the way down here. And again, it adds another layer, like the prompt told you, like, oh, it's going to be complex. This one now, we're getting the layer of the pride.
So just to kind of recap, not even looking at the last half yet, because there's a lot in that last bit, we see two really good comparisons, one to him as a flower and one to him as a boy. In both of these, things have ended too early for him, right? He hasn't been able to fulfill the thing that he meant to do. Swimming in this greatness has fallen short, and he has lost his ability to move forward. And then as the plant one, you know, his roots are cut or nipped and he's not able to achieve his goals. That is a shift from what we saw in the opening, that bitter tone that we saw when we first started. And so it seems like in different ways through the figurative language, he's coming to terms with what has really happened to him. In the first one, his roots are nipped. He takes very little responsibility for that, right, at all. But in the next one, he admits his high blown pride. And a lot of people got that in the essay, which was really, really good. And he also understands that things will be forever changed. This wide ocean is no longer available to him, and a rude stream that must forever hide me is where he's going to be now, right? So as you move through the passage, you have to see the progress that he's making, because remember, in the prompt, we are looking for a complex response, right? So how does he begin to come to terms with it? And then the last bit, it says, vain pomp and glory of this world, I hate ye. And some of you did a good job at looking up those terms, right? So vain, of course, is like thinking a lot of yourself, and pomp is splendor, right? And that, you guys should know that from the graduation song, right? So it's the splendor and glory of this world. And then he says, I hate ye. And ye is you, right? So he is speaking directly to vain pomp and glory of this world. He's saying he hates it now. He recognizes that he has fallen and he's never going to be at that place again. Is that poor man that hangs on prince's favors? Oh, sorry, I skipped a line. I feel my heart new opened. How wretched is that poor man that hangs on prince's favors. And sometimes people in this thought it was talking about a prince, since we were looking at a king, but he's still talking about himself, that his worth hung on the prince's favors, that he was that poor man. He was wretched, having to rely solely on the prince's favors. There is betwixt that smile we would aspire to, that sweet aspect of princes and their ruin, more pangs and fears than wars or women have. And so here he's talking about the condition of being a servant to royalty, that you're at their whim, right? Betwixt their smile we would aspire to, sweet aspect of princes and their ruin, and then the fear of wars, right? And then the last part is the last thing that was mentioned in the prompt, which, or actually it's the first one mentioned in the prompt, which is the illusion. And we get all the way to the end. When he falls like Lucifer, never to hope again. So I think that you have to be really careful with Lucifer, because there are many stories about Lucifer, most of them having to do with him being evil, right? Going after mankind. But the application of that idea in here doesn't necessarily work, right? He is not evil. He is not going after them. He has been terminated from his position. And so we can't really talk about the Lucifer in the garden who is tempting people. or the evil Lucifer that is trying to go after people or destroy God. Instead, what we have to look at is that he has taken on the role of Lucifer, that he recognizes that he has done something to deserve this fall from glory. And like Lucifer, he has been cast out, which then in the analogy, if he puts himself as Lucifer, then the king is God, right? And so he is resigned now to an understanding that this is his doing and his fault. And he takes on that blame and that guilt for whatever it is that he's done. So, and then finally, this very last line, never to hope again, right? He has decided that it's over for him. He'll never be back there.
I think it was tempting for some people to think like, oh, the tone changes from this to this to this. Like, I think people who said, oh, he's bitter and he's angry, you kind of, some of my students, you wanted it to end in a more positive way. I think like human nature, we're like, the tone is shifting after some disastrous event. So I'm just subconsciously going to think it will end more like hopeful. There might be a second chance. Maybe he's going to like use this experience and apply it elsewhere. But there's nothing here that would indicate that. It's like if it ends with never to hope again, we can't ignore that so much. So, and that's something that's hard, I think, like try and remove some biases about either like what you think should happen. There were some interesting like inferences being made about Wolsey or like what he might have done before this moment or after. If you read the play, then good, but if not, try and stick to the text itself.
Yeah, overstepping in predictions can get you into kind of a bad situation. I had some of my students say that he was going to be looking for revenge because at the end he's now Satan, right? So he's going to be trying to get revenge on the king, or the king hasn't heard the last of him yet. But there's nothing to indicate that that's the case. He has been cast out. He will never return. That's the point of the Lucifer illusion. And there was one other one that I saw in there. Oh, the other thing is, because there are threes in here, especially like the 3 days, what was it? On the third day comes a frost, a killing frost. People wanted to say it was a reference to Christ. But the problem with that is he is well, first of all, Christ returns, right? He does come again, and at the end he's saying never to hope again, so that doesn't work. And he has never really said that he's done anything that is Christ-like. In fact, he's been terminated for something that he has done that is against the throne. So and there's nothing in here to show any other reference to Christ-like figures, right? He hasn't sacrificed himself. He isn't doing this for the good of everyone else. So there's no turning the other cheek in here. So that would be a bit of a stretch to bring Jesus in here. Other than maybe to say the repetition of threes makes you think of betrayal, right, from the Bible. That's maybe an implied allusion when you think about 3 times and the importance of 3 times to the story. Perhaps he feels betrayed. That could be a little bit of a stretch and a little comment where you could say he feels betrayed as shown in the 3 farewells and the 3 on the third day, the frost comes. The reference to 3 could be a reference to Christ and the betrayal of Christ. So, which you could do, but again, that wouldn't be a whole argument that you could make that he is somehow Christ-like.
And then another thing, because this kind of relates to all the discussions we've been having actually about Heart of Darkness and Marlowe, but there are moments where I think people were wanting to point out sarcasm, but weren't sure. If you're identifying bitterness, there were moments where maybe like you weren't pulling a quote to support it. You were just saying, oh, it was bitter because he was being terminated. And if you're terminated, you're going to be bitter about it. But look for, like, he says greatness twice. And this seems to be a word that's thrown out as like, oh yeah, all my greatness. Like you would say that after all of the greatness is gone. So make sure, again, with the tone, you're not just saying like, oh, the passage uses tone, or tone is conveyed through these words. Like you want to have those specific moments that you can really close read, because there were some beautiful moments of close reading that you guys had, pulling out specific words and phrases. So that is my other piece of advice.
Something else that I saw is don't separate diction from tone, and don't separate details from imagery, right? Keep them together. Some people listed in their thesis statements that they would be looking at diction and tone, and you can't look at tone without diction. So just stick to tone.
This would be like that, like they would talk about tone in their body paragraph. They can mention diction in that body paragraph, but like tone is the purpose. And you also mentioned imagery and
details.
And
in this case, the imagery came through figurative language. So you got some really good images of, the frost and the bloom and the leaves and even the ocean, right? So we have some imagery in here. And that mostly was that comparison happening. You could definitely sway this into imagery.
Yeah, for sure. So again, I know in the start, Miss Angel Diaz said like, okay, they're giving you these 3. Those are really safe because there's going to be some, but it's cool how, like you just said, from figurative language, you could talk about imagery. Tone, obviously, you're going to talk about diction. People even talked about diction here a little bit. I saw, maybe it depended. I heard people talking about like metaphors. Someone mentioned apostrophe for vain pomp and glory of this world, I hate ye. That was like another device. So if you're seeing stuff and you can see how they're working together, that could be cool. Yeah.
Do you, I don't know how long we've been going here, but do you want to look at the kudos and recs, or do you just want them to do that on their own?
I think, let's see, I think you guys could probably check these out. You guys could probably read kudos on your own. We've mentioned a few already. We pulled some examples of thesis statements from you guys that we thought were really good. And we have some body paragraphs we liked. These 2 had to do with the pride aspect. And then these 2 were body paragraphs about figurative language. We have sort of like 2 conclusion statements to look at. And then we gave a bunch of recommendations about what to do, everything from like how to deal with a thesis, breaking up your paragraphs, avoiding the AP Lang trap of talking about the audience too much.
Can I say that one thing that I noticed about the talking about the audience? For this one in particular, I noticed that when students couldn't find purpose, like what the so what, I say that all the time, like what's the so what, right? Why does it matter? Students fell on to show the audience something, which is in kind of a cop-out, right? Like, I don't really know why, so I'm just gonna say it's to make people feel things. So you've got to make sure that you have a larger purpose. If you go back and take a look at the samples we gave you, there are some really good samples of what the larger purpose could be. And I wanted to show on the conclusions really quickly, if you could go back to that slide. Both of them were a concluding sentence, right? No one had time to do a really good conclusion, and maybe you will eventually as you get used to the timing. But for both of these, it was only a sentence, but the one in green had such better purpose, right? It answered so much more the so what than the one in red. And I tended to, once I figured out kind of the system I wanted to do, I tended to highlight things that I thought were done really well in your essays in green, and things that I thought needed some, work or some perfecting in red. So if you're looking at yours and you see some green or some red, no, at the beginning I was using like yellow and orange. Anyways, I'm sorry about that. I will use green and red from now on, but you can take a look at those and see. The only difference between these two is the specificity in the conclusion. In the green, talks about the human desire for greatness and the inevitability of eventual failure, whereas the one below just says the dismissal from a coveted position, right? And both of them use figurative language, but the figurative language describing blossoming buds versus figurative language, comma, juxtaposition and biblical allusions. So the one above gives what each one was. So I thought that, that was a really good way to kind of pull everything for the essay back together and remind your reader, what the purpose of this was. And that should come not from the audience or the reader. That should come from the complexity, right? That last piece that's on there is Wolsey's complex response to his dismissal from court. So the last thing you should say is something about that complexity, which I think the one in green does well.
Yeah.
And then were there any other, go to the last, if you don't mind, go to the last Rex slide. Mm-hmm. This, I know this is going to sound mean. There's some pet peeves of mine. Get the names right. They're right up above. You have the passage. I cannot tell you how many different spellings of Shakespeare and Wolsey I saw. Proofread. There were so many of you that could have got a point for that sophistication, but you didn't proofread. So you've got to get your spelling right. You've got to get the names right. It's simple things like that. So make sure you do that. And then don't confuse Shakespeare and Wolsey. You'd start off with Wolsey and then say Shakespeare says, or he, but that he meant Shakespeare, not Wolsey. So that was confusing too.
Yeah, don't think we're being petty. We're trying to help you get that sophistication point because they might even be tougher on you since you're typing it out and it's open note. So we don't want you to lose a point for these little things you could fix. So yeah, check out everything. Read through this slideshow. We have more things to work on up here, and then of course the kudos, the examples. Check it out before you do the other AP Lit FRQ Q2 that you're going to get on Tuesday, April 21st. All right. Anything else, Miss Angel Diaz?
No, I think we went over our 20-minute mark though. Sorry, everybody. Trying to help.
Yeah, we have a good time. So, all right, guys.
Bye, guys.
Bye.